Do you remember when you were young? When your thoughts were untainted and you were curious? Life was about exploring, playing in the sun, laughing. You were asking questions about everything, getting your answers and then having that feeling of accomplishment when you were the one answering the questions. It's really a wonderful, magical time of our lives. We build memories and learn how to exist within the human condition. And if we're lucky, we even form bonds with others that last throughout our whole lives. The knowledge we absorb during this time lasts a lifetime too. This is when we learn the basics, the fundamental things that give us the tools to take our learning from one level to the next. We learn to read, we learn to add and subtract, and we learn that we live on a globe. A giant ball spinning and revolving around an even greater ball, the sun. These things are the given, the things that are inarguable, the things we can all agree on. 1 + 1 = 2, CAT spells cat, and the earth is a globe. We always took it for granted. After all, who's wondering whether or not the earth is flat when there are so many more important things to worry about? Such as poverty, hunger, and war. War is one of the worst things to plague this earth. A fraction of the amount of money spent empire building could end poverty and hunger overnight. Take a look at the US military spending compared to the rest of the countries in the top 10. No one comes close to us. What is all that money paying for? How do we manage to spend almost 10 times as much as the next highest spender? The answer is simple but grim. It's because we're funding both sides of the war.
Is the United States supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria? The answer is yes.
Fact number 1. There is no question that Al-Qaeda fighters are part of the opposition forces attempting to overthrow Syria's government. Fact number 2. The creation of Al-Qaeda wasn't Islamic fundamentalism. It was the CIA. The Mujahideen was created by the CIA to cause problems for the Soviets. And you might say that's crazy talk, right? Here's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
To be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How? Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of Mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better. Now you look back, the people we're fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against the Soviets.
So it's not a conspiracy theory, it's history. And it's history that's being repeated in Libya and now in Syria.
And there's no sign of slowing down or stopping anytime soon. Just listen to what General Wesley Clark has to say, if you haven't heard it already.
10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
So go through the countries again?
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
We know why the war started, and I won't get into detail about the events of 9/11 because it's been exposed already. Okay, so this is Benazir Bhutto. She was the 11th and the 13th Prime Minister of Pakistan, and she told the U.S. that funding these subgroups was a bad idea. But in this clip, she reveals something particularly interesting, and she was assassinated less than 2 months after this interview.
Yes, well, one of them is a very key figure in security. He's a former military officer. He's someone that has had dealings with Jaish-e-Mohammed, one of the banned groups, with Maulana Azhar, who was in an Indian jail for decapitating 3 British tourists and 3 American tourists. And he also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. Now I know that having dealings with people...
This was in 2007. Okay, now if you think about it, whenever the US goes after a high-profile person, it's all over the media with video and pictures. Look at Saddam Hussein. We saw him captured and later executed all on film. Same with Gaddafi, very well publicized. He was dragged through the streets and brutalized and murdered in front of everybody. But the man supposedly responsible for starting it all, the mastermind of 9/11, and what do we get? Fake pictures, an animated reenactment of the raid, and they quickly and quietly bury him at sea from an aircraft carrier. I mean, give me a break. They say they don't want to show the images so we don't offend Muslim extremists, but it's okay to show all the other dead Muslims? Right. Our countrymen have been fighting and dying in a war on terror for over 15 years against this never-ending stream of boogeymen. I mean, look at this guy. It's like a bad movie plot. All fed to you by the mainstream media, which is owned by the same 6 corporations: CBS, GE, News Corporation, Rupert Murdoch fame, Viacom, the Walt Disney Company, and if you don't know what they're about, this will tell you right here, and Time Warner. And then if you dig a little bit deeper into who owns Time Warner, you'll see the top shareholder is Vanguard Group. And if you look under Vanguard Group, you'll see Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, General Electric, AT&T, JP Morgan, Verizon, Pfizer, Wells Fargo, Intel, Merck, Cisco Systems, Walt Disney, United Healthcare, Qualcomm, CVS, Boeing Company, which is a military contractor, Starbucks, Lockheed Martin is a major military contractor as well, the Dow Chemical Company, Goldman Sachs, ConocoPhillips, Kimberly-Clark, Monsanto, Raytheon, another major military contractor, Northrop Grumman is also a military contractor, and these private companies are an anonymous way for the elites to own everything. So then just go click on each one and find out who's at the top. Well, the same names are always at the top of each of these big companies. It's not spread out very much, is it? And it's, you know, not much of a stretch to see how these same privately owned companies, you know, have the interests of all these same companies in their best interests. They're all different sectors: communications, military contracting, computer manufacturers, gas and oil, healthcare, and also, you know, big pharma, all kind of sitting together neatly in this little basket. Always the same top companies too, owning it. So you can see that the same 2 or 3 companies are handling the majority of the military contractors, and at the same time they have both healthcare and big pharmaceuticals, and then chemical companies like Dow and Monsanto, profiting off of the stuff that makes you sick, as well as the stuff that treats the symptoms for your sickness. And in case you were wondering, yeah, Google's included in that group too. Vanguard is a major owner of Google and Facebook and everything else. Let's not forget the Federal Reserve, which is neither. A mostly privately owned corporation that basically prints money out of nowhere and loans it to our government with interest at a rate that can never be repaid. This is why we are all born into debt. This is why we live to work instead of working to live. The money they print isn't backed by anything of real value like gold or silver. The worst part is that they are never held accountable for their actions. They lost $9 trillion and they still didn't get audited.
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which according to Bloomberg now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
I'll have to look specifically at that Bloomberg article. I'm not, I don't know if I have actually seen that particular one.
That's not the point. The question is, have you done any investigation or auditing of off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question.
Have you conducted any investigation or auditing of the losses that the Federal Reserve has experienced on its lending since last September?
We're still in the process of conducting that review. Until we actually, you know, go out and gather the information, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific question. So
are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
I don't know if you're telling me that you're mentioning that there's losses. I'm just saying that we're not, until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way to that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
Okay, so war, financial corruption, those are big issues. Well, the other thing that has really had me looking into stuff is geoengineering. It's been going on for decades, and it keeps getting worse, and it's never a good thing when someone like Bill Gates gets behind it. I moved from California to North Carolina in 2011, and when I first moved out here, I couldn't believe how clear the sky was and how fresh the air was, and I was always looking up, and I gotta tell you, it didn't last very long. Next thing you know, in 2014, the skies just started getting sprayed like crazy, and these are all pictures that I took. Some days it's so bad that I can smell the chemicals in the air. It smells like those fog machines in the club. And I've had a metallic taste in my mouth from it. I've gotten headaches from it. I don't see how anybody can deny that this is going on. If you want to know more about this, I would look up people like Kristen Megan, Matt Landman, and Dane Wigington. They all do really good work as far as exposing geoengineering. If you don't believe me, look it up for yourself. Here are some screenshots of some patents that the U.S. government holds on the geoengineering practices. Another subject that I researched is child sex trafficking, kidnapping, and exploitation. The cover-ups on this are extensive, and you will be shocked at who is involved and where it leads. People will dismiss the ties between the elites and Satanism, but who else would victimize children but an evil being? Research Ted Gunderson. He is the one who got me questioning everything, and he did excellent work for the truth movement. So where am I going with all of this? A place that I never would have thought I'd go in a million years, and all of this stuff that I was looking into, the deeper I went down that rabbit hole, I finally ran into the flat earth. And I know how ridiculous it sounds because I thought it was the dumbest thing that I had ever seen, and I wouldn't even look at flat earth anything for a long time because it just seemed so ridiculous to me. One day I decided I would go ahead and watch a flat earth video. I thought it would be funny. I thought I would laugh. At the end of the video, I was not laughing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so immediately I started doing my own research. I went to NASA, I went to space.com, I started downloading pictures of the globe and pictures of Earth and examining them, and almost immediately I realized how inconsistent these pictures are and how fake they are. And they're not real. These are not real photographs. These are CGI. These are computer-generated images, okay? And it's very obvious when you start looking into it. Look at how different the sizes of the continents are from picture to picture. I mean, they can't even decide what size they want their continents to be. Take a look at this picture of the globe. It's pretty famous. Anybody can go download it. And if you take a close look at what's in the clouds. I mean, they spell it right out for you, and you can't make this stuff up, and it's not me photoshopping it. This is how it comes. Download it yourself. Also, look at this heat signature from the Earth. They say the Earth is facing the sun at a tilt, but the heat signature goes directly around the equator, right around the middle of the Earth. It actually pays no attention to the axial tilt, and that is what they tell you causes the seasons. The sun is actually farther away from the Earth during the summer months and closer in the winter months, but they tell you that the axial tilt is what causes the heat change. But here, that totally contradicts it. And if you look at this flat Earth picture, you can see that the heat signature is right in the middle, and that is exactly where the flat Earth model says the sun's path is. It circles above the Earth. I also started looking at all the moon landing photos and really scrutinizing them, and you can see, you know, even though a lot of it can be explained away, some of it just can't, like how close they are to the horizon of the moon. It just doesn't make sense. It should go far beyond where you see it going in the pictures. And look at the lander. The lander, I mean, they're supposed to take this thing out all the way to the moon and back, and it looks like it's got thin aluminum crinkled sheets all over it and tape and curtain rods, and it looks very thrown together. And if you look at the moonlander foot, there is no dust in the moonlander foot. I mean, it has a 10,000 pound thrust engine and it didn't disturb any of the dust on the moon. This is a picture that I put together of various elements from the moonlander and the moon landing, and you can take a look at the lander itself. Very cheap looking, very thrown together. It looks like it cannot withstand the going through a vacuum of space. It looks like it would just fall apart. You can see in the upper left, there's the blast crater that NASA says you can see from Earth, yet below the moonlander, there is absolutely zero disturbance from it actually landing on the moon. No dust has been disturbed at all. There's no dust in the landing pads. There is no sign of the engine firing, no blackening of the exhaust tube. And look at the flag. They put this flag that's supposed to be there after they leave the moon, but they put it right next to the lander, again with a 10,000 pound thrust engine. When they leave, the flag would blow over, it would disintegrate. It doesn't make any sense for them to put it there. It's so staged. Here's a close-up of the picture of the wheel of the lunar rover, and there is no track in front of it or behind it, like it was just gently placed on top of the dust of the moon. This picture of the astronaut with the Earth in the corner, you can see that the Earth looks pasted into the photo and the background looks cropped out. Here the astronauts are, they don't even have any helmets on, and it still looks like they're on the moon. You can see this other picture of Stanley Kubrick walking with a NASA astronaut, a NASA advisor, senior administrator from NASA. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's very suspicious because we all know that 2001: A Space Odyssey came out before the moon landings happened, so Stanley Kubrick had clearly already perfected his technique on filming space scenes. A NASA astronaut practicing in the pool, and then him below in space. It goes on. I found some pictures from the lunar orbiter, and I did some Photoshop forensics, and you can see clearly where the images have been edited. Look at this one of the Earth. It looks rather large coming over the limb of the moon, and you do a little Photoshop forensics and you see where things were cut and pasted, and even the digital artifacts that you get to show up when you adjust the levels in Photoshop, they don't match. I drew a line here. It shows you clearly that the lines that you connect from the digital signature of the photos don't even line up. They're not parallel. This is a picture that somebody was clever enough to put together, showing that the space between the Earth and the moon can fit all these planets in between it, side by side, with room to spare even. And then the next thing you know, they show you a picture of Earth and its moon from Mars, and the proportions clearly don't line up, and it can't be explained away by optics. Now, I know all of that can be considered just circumstantial and it's not really enough to convince anybody, but let's do some thought experiments, okay? One day my son asked me, because he saw the moon in the sky during the daytime, how come if the moon is in space we can still see it? And I thought that was a great question. The moon is 239,000 miles away. The size of Tycho crater is 86 kilometers, or that's about equal to 53 miles across. Now, the distance of the moon from the Earth is 79 times the width of the United States. If you think about it, why do you think that you are able to see something as small as 53 miles across with your naked eye from 239,000 miles away? It really doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be able to see that. That's like looking at your friend from 6 miles away and being able to see them. Now, take a look at the space station. They say that it's in orbit 220 miles above the surface of the Earth. One thing to consider with the space station is that it's out in space, and there are extreme temperatures out in space. When it is on the sun side of Earth, the temperatures get very, very hot. When it is on the night side of Earth, the temperatures get very, very cold. So you have a very extreme temperature change every 45 minutes on all the equipment. It's a very hostile environment. And if you've ever looked into the SR-71 Blackbird, that jet that they said flew at the edge of space, every time that thing came down for a landing, it was leaking like a sieve, okay? And they have this space station that's been up there for years and years and years, and it's never blown a seal, it's never had a problem. It just keeps going on and on. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, without any effect. The other thing to consider is the size of the space station. They say that it's roughly the size of a football field. Here is a comparison picture of the space station compared to the size of a passenger jet. Now, when you look at a passenger jet flying at cruising altitude, you see it every day. They are about 5 or 6 miles up in the air. Now, imagine if you put this object at 220 miles above the Earth's surface. That is 44 times as high as cruising altitude for a jet. And even with a telescope, I don't see how anybody would be able to see that. The formula to calculate the Earth's curvature is 8 inches per mile squared. So at some point, when you're looking at things off in the distance, they should drop below the Earth's curvature and they should begin to curve away from you. But this doesn't happen. You can look at these pictures of the Chicago skyline, and at 56 miles away, it should be 2,000 feet below the Earth's curvature, and you really shouldn't be able to see any of these buildings, but we can see it. People also like to say that they watch boats disappear over the horizon because of the Earth's curvature, but is that really what's happening? If you look in this video, you can see that the zoom brings these boats back into view, where when you're looking at it with your naked eye, it looked like there was nothing there, but then here come these boats back into view. So clearly, they're not disappearing because of the curvature, they're disappearing because of the limitations of the human eye and also perspective. At some point, we really need to be honest with ourselves about the observations that we make about the world we see with our eyes. Do things disappear into the vanishing point on a flat plane, just like we're taught in art class, or do they curve away from us on a ball? Do we ever really see the curvature? Have you seen the curvature? If you watch some high-altitude balloon footage, you'll see that if it doesn't have a fisheye lens to give the artificial impression of a curvature, there really isn't one. And this is the most irrefutable proof in my eyes that we do not live on a ball. If there is no curve, then there is no ball. Period. That's all there is to it. It doesn't matter if you're on the ground, it doesn't matter if you're on a mountaintop, it doesn't matter if you're 20 miles high in the sky. The horizon never curves away from you. It never gives the impression of being on a ball. It only gives the impression of being on a flat, level plane. Again, high altitude balloon footage, 20 miles up in the sky. ISS is 220 miles up in the sky, so this times 10 or 11, when does this turn into this? When does it happen? Or does the horizon always remain at your eye level? Does it always look like it's just right there in front of you? There is no curvature, none. Let's talk about water. The natural physics of water is to find and maintain its level, or the natural physics of water is to stick to a spinning ball. How does water behave in the real world? What do you see? Now, I know a lot of people like to say, well, gravity keeps the water stuck to the ball. And okay, let's talk about gravity. Gravity is the invisible force that keeps everything stuck to our spinning ball. Now, according to Newton, every force should have an equal and opposite force, but what is the opposite force of gravity? Well, they tell you that the opposite force to gravity is the centrifugal force of the spinning ball. Our Earth is spinning on an axis, and just by the very nature of the shape of a ball that is spinning on its axis, the centrifugal force differs at each point on the ball, being greatest at the equator, 1,650 kilometers an hour, or 1,040 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound. Then, as you move up or down in the latitudes on the ball, it gets slower and slower. Thus, the centrifugal force is weaker as you get towards the poles. Therefore, it is counteracting gravity less and less as you get towards the top or towards the bottom of the ball. So, why aren't the people at the North Pole being squashed like bugs? How are they even able to walk if this force of gravity is pulling them towards the Earth and there is no longer a centrifugal force counteracting gravity? How can they even pick themselves up off the ground? How about the constellations? The stars rotate around the North Star, Polaris. We see the same constellations throughout the year, just in different positions. Some people think that this proves that the Earth is a sphere, but I think it proves that the stars rotate over our head. Here is the sun in space. Here is the Earth. The Earth orbits the sun while spinning on its axis. At night, when we are not facing the sun, we see the stars in the dark part of space. Why don't we see completely different constellations 3 months later when we are a quarter of the way through our orbit? Or how about 3 months after that when we are on the opposite side of the sun? Every 3 months the constellations should be completely different, but they aren't. All the ancient cultures and all the ancient texts describe a flat, motionless Earth. So what happened? What changed? Who decided that the Earth was a ball?
Map of ancient Egypt. I've inserted 2 sticks or obelisks, one up here in Alexandria and one down here in Syene. Now, if at a certain moment each stick casts no shadow at all, that's perfectly easy to understand, provided the Earth is flat. If the shadow at Syene is at a certain length, and the shadow at Alexandria is the same length, that also makes sense on a flat Earth. But how could it be, Eratosthenes asked, that at the same instant there was no shadow at Syene and a very substantial shadow at Alexandria? The only answer was that the surface of the Earth is curved. Not only that, but the greater the curvature, the bigger the difference in the lengths of the shadows. The sun is so far away that its rays are parallel when they reach the Earth.
Wait a minute, how did Eratosthenes know how far away the sun was? To make this measurement, you have to assume the sun is extremely far away and that the sun's rays are parallel. But how do you look at things like this and get that the rays are parallel? Because it certainly doesn't look that way to me. If you look at the crepuscular rays of the sun coming through the clouds, you can see that it looks like the sun is right behind the clouds and the rays are emanating from the source of light, and those rays are not parallel. The most commonly accepted flat Earth model has the sun small and close and circling over the Earth. If you use a lamp and 2 objects of the same size, you can see how the same effect Eratosthenes saw can be created. Dr. Auguste Piccard was the first man to reach the stratosphere at a height of 75,459 feet, and this is how he described what he saw. This is before NASA and the Air Force. What about the moon? Does it really reflect sunlight like they say it does? Pay attention the next time you see a half moon in the sky opposite the sun. If the moon really reflects the sunlight, why isn't the moon full if it's facing the sun? Is there really a Hubble telescope in space, or is it just a telescope flying around in a jet? Are they telling the truth about what they show us, or are they laughing at us? If you pay attention, you will see their mistakes. Are we really making progress, or are we being held back? Once prosperous countries are being bombed into oblivion. Children are starving all across the plain, and the powers that should not be spend billions on ushering in their new world order. NASA and their deception is the tool they use to keep us from knowing the true nature of who we are and where we live. They don't want us to know our true potential. They don't want us to know that we don't need them. They want us ignorant and docile, so we keep mining their gold. The globalists need a globe. Once you realize that they don't have one, you can take the power back. To plague this earth. A fraction of the amount of money spent empire building could end poverty and hunger overnight. Take a look at the US military spending compared to the rest of the countries in the top 10. No one comes close to us. What is all that money paying for? How do we manage to spend almost 10 times as much as the next highest spender? The answer is simple but grim. It's because we're funding both sides of the war.
Is the United States supporting al-Qaeda in Syria? The answer is yes.
Fact number one. There is no question that al-Qaeda fighters are part of the opposition forces attempting to overthrow Syria's government. Fact number two. The creation of al-Qaeda wasn't Islamic fundamentalism. It was the CIA. The Mujahideen was created by the CIA to cause problems for the Soviets. And you might say that
Against the Soviets.
So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's history. And it's history that's being repeated in Libya and now in Syria.
And there's no sign of slowing down or stopping anytime soon. Just listen to what General Wesley Clark has to say, if you haven't heard it already.
10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do."
This is when we learn the basics, the fundamental things that give us the tools to take our learning from one level to the next. We learn to read, we learn to add and subtract, and we learn that we live on a globe. A giant ball spinning and revolving around an even greater ball, the sun. These things are the given, the things that are inarguable, the things we can all agree on. 1 + 1 = 2, CAT spells cat, and the earth is a globe. We always took it for granted. After all, who's wondering whether or not the earth is flat when there are so many more important things to worry about, such as poverty, hunger, and war? War is one of the worst things.
It's crazy talk, right? Here's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
To be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How? Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan. And we were successful. The Soviets left Afghanistan, and then we said, great, goodbye, leaving these trained people who were fanatical in Afghanistan and Pakistan, leaving them well armed, creating a mess, frankly, that at the time we didn't really recognize. We were just so happy to see the Soviet Union fall, and we thought, okay, fine, we're okay now. Everything's going to be so much better. Now you look back, the people we're fighting today, we were supporting in the fight against.
Do you remember when you were young? When your thoughts were untainted, and you were curious. Life was about exploring, playing in the sun, laughing. You were asking questions about everything, getting your answers, and then having that feeling of accomplishment when you were the one answering the questions. It's really a wonderful, magical time of our lives. We build memories and learn how to exist within the human condition. And if we're lucky, we even form bonds with others that last throughout our whole lives. The knowledge we absorb during this time lasts a lifetime too.